British colonizers murdered 70 innocent people using poison, hidden inside a gift given to gain their trust.
The year 1842 represents one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Australian frontier. In the rugged, beautiful landscape of what is now southeast Queensland, a silent war was being waged. The British pastoralists, known as squatters, were moving inland with thousands of sheep, claiming vast tracts of land that had been managed by Indigenous clans for over 60,000 years.
For the Jinibara and Kabi Kabi peoples, the arrival of Kilcoy Station wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat. The settlers didn't understand the complex land management systems of the First Nations people. They saw empty land, while the clans saw their grocery stores, their cathedrals. Conflict was inevitable. Traditional hunting was labeled as cattle stealing, and the Aboriginal defense of their territory was labeled as outrages.
By the time the summer of 1842 arrived, the clans were being pushed into the hills, away from the fertile river flats. Conflict had broken out near the station, and several sheep had been taken. The settlers, led by Evan Mackenzie and his overseers, decided that muskets were too loud and too likely to draw the attention of the authorities in Sydney. They needed a more efficient way to deal with the problem. Follow echoes of the past before we continue the Kilcoy Massacre. They consumed families. And tell us, how do you rate our work? The plan they devised was one of pure, calculated treachery. They sent word to the local clans that they wanted to establish a peace. They invited the families to come forward to receive a gift of rations, a common practice used to foster dependency or temporary truces. They provided large quantities of flour, the staple of the colonial diet. To the Aboriginal people, who were struggling to find traditional grains, this was a life-saving gesture. They had no reason to suspect that the very substance that represented peace was actually a weapon of mass destruction. What happened next is a matter of historical record, though it was suppressed for decades. The flour was mixed with strychnine. In the 19th century, strychnine was commonly used by pastoralists to kill dingoes that threatened their flocks. It is a bitter, crystalline alkaloid, but when mixed with large amounts of flour and sugar, the taste can be masked. The biological impact of strychnine is among the most horrific of any known poison. It is a spinal stimulant. Once ingested, it removes the brakes from the nervous system. Every muscle in the body begins to contract at full strength, simultaneously. The first stage, a sense of apprehension and stiffening of the neck. The second stage, violent tetanic convulsions. The back arches, opisthotonus, so violently that the spine can literally fracture under the pressure of the victim's own muscles. The third stage, the facial muscles pull back into a terrifying, permanent grin known as rhizus sardonicus. Because the respiratory muscles, the diaphragm and the chest, become locked in a state of permanent contraction, the victim cannot breathe. They die of asphyxiation, while remaining almost entirely conscious and aware of their surroundings, until the very final moments. This is what the families at Kilcoy experienced. As the sun began to dip below the horizon at the camp near Kilcoy, the peace offering was consumed. This was a communal culture. When food was given, it was shared. The elders ensured the children were fed first. The mothers baked the damper in the ashes of the campfires. Within 30 minutes, the camp was a theater of screams. Entire family units began to collapse. Because the poison was in the food, everyone was affected at the same time. There was no one left to help, no one to go for water, no one to pull the children away from the agony. Survivors later recounted the sight of 70 people, men, women, and children, writhing on the ground in the flickering firelight, their bodies twisting into unnatural shapes. By morning, the camp was silent. The only sound was the wind through the eucalyptus trees and the distant bleating of the sheep that had triggered this massacre. Rumors of the massacre began to filter back to Brisbane and Sydney. Even in a violent colonial society, the idea of mass poisoning families was seen by some as un-English and cowardly. Commissioner of Crown Lands, Stephen Simpson, was dispatched to Kilcoy to investigate. Simpson's report was chilling. He found the evidence of mass death, but he hit a wall of silence. The legal hurdles were insurmountable. The testimony law. Under colonial law, heathen Aboriginal people could not give evidence in court because they couldn't swear an oath on the Bible. This meant the only people who could legally describe the crime were the victims, who were either dead or legally silenced. The squatter code. The white employees at Kilcoy knew that if they spoke against their masters, their careers and potentially their lives were over. The burden of proof. To convict someone of poisoning, the Crown had to prove exactly who put the poison in the flour. Without a white witness, it was impossible. Evan Mackenzie was the man at the center of the storm. While he was never officially charged, the weight of the scandal made his position in the colony tenuous. Shortly after the investigation slowed, he sold his interests and fled back to Scotland. He lived out his life as a wealthy baronet, a respected member of society, while the bones of 70 people bleached in the sun back in Queensland.
For over a century, the Kilcoy Massacre was omitted from Australian history books. It was part of the Great Australian Silence. But the Jinibara and Kabi Kabi people never forgot. The stories were passed down through oral histories, keeping the names and the locations of the tragedy alive. Today, we recognize Kilcoy not just as a tragedy, but as a crime against humanity. It reminds us that the settlement of the frontier was often a campaign of terror. The victims of Kilcoy were not soldiers. They were not enemies in a war. They were human beings who accepted a gesture of friendship and paid for that trust with the most agonizing deaths imaginable. History is not just about celebrating progress. It is about the courage to look at the shadows. If you believe that truth is the only way to achieve real healing, share this story. How do you rate our work? We strive to bring these buried truths to light. Let us know in the comments if you want more deep dives into the hidden history of the frontier.